What if I told you that the man who starred in The Sound of Music absolutely hated it, and couldn't stand his co-star Julie Andrews either? Christopher Plummer once called the hit film The Sound of Mucus and drank himself numb during filming just to get through the sweetness. But what could make an actor despise one of the films that made him a legend? Picture this: March 2, 1965, New York City's Rivoli Theater. The lights dim, the orchestra swells, and Julie Andrews spins across an Austrian mountaintop, her arms outstretched against impossible blue skies. Everyone in that theater knew they were watching something magical. The Sound of Music wasn't just released, it erupted. Within 4 weeks, it dominated. Box offices across America crumbled under the cinematic might of this iconic film. By November 1966, it shattered every record in Hollywood history, surpassing Gone with the Wind to become the highest-grossing film ever made at that time. It stayed in theaters for 4.5 years. In some cities, ticket sales exceeded the entire population. The numbers were staggering: 283 million admissions worldwide, 10 Academy Award nominations, and 5 wins, including Best Picture and Best Director. But here's where the story gets interesting. The critics absolutely hated it. Pauline Kael, soon to become America's most influential film critic, called it the sugar-coated lie that people seem to want to eat and the single most repressive influence on artistic freedom in movies. Time magazine dismissed it. Joan Didion wrote in Vogue that it was a film that was more embarrassing than most films. The criticisms poured in like Niagara Falls. The New York Times singled out one performance in particular as horrendous, and surprisingly, that performance belonged to Christopher Plummer. Here's the twist nobody expected: Plummer agreed with them. Christopher Plummer didn't just dislike The Sound of Music, he despised it with a passion that would define decades of his life. In his 2008 memoir In Spite of Myself, Plummer revealed he couldn't even bring himself to call the film by its proper name. He called it the movie, sometimes S&M, but his favorite nickname was The Sound of Mucus. Why such hatred? Plummer told news outlets that the film was an awful and sentimental rubbish body of work. He hated the character he played and said he had to work hard to add humor to it. But did Plummer really give the film his all? He said the film was awful, but it went deeper than that. Much deeper. Christopher Plummer was a Shakespearean actor. His great-grandfather was Sir John Abbott, Canada's 3rd Prime Minister. He was a serious stage actor, trained vocally and physically for the classics. He was born on December 13, 1929, in Toronto. However, he suffered tragedy early. His parents split soon after he was born, and he grew up in Saint-Neville, Quebec, in his maternal grandparents' home. His father had nothing to do with him until he was a teenager. By that time, he had already fallen in love with acting after watching Laurence Olivier's 1944 film Henry V. Christopher was blown away, and he decided acting was what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. He apprenticed at the Montreal Repertory Theatre alongside another future star, William Shatner. By 1956, he was delivering his own mind-blowing version of Henry V at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario. This was the Christopher Plummer of 1964, a man who lived and breathed Shakespeare, a man who considered himself a glorious actor. And then came Captain Von Trapp, the character he had to play in The Sound of Music. Imagine going from getting applause for an incredible portrayal of Henry V to Captain Von Trapp, a strict father who raised his 7 children with military discipline after their mother's death. The captain wasn't one to express emotions and didn't have a relationship with his children, so they rebelled. His children scared away several governesses by playing tricks, until he hired Maria, played by Julie Andrews, as their new governess. Although the children misbehaved at first, Maria responded with kindness and patience. Soon, they came to trust and respect her. She also tried to get their father to be less strict and closer to his children. Eventually, the captain softened and was impressed by how talented his chaotic children were as singers. Maybe if Plummer had learned from the character, his life would have been different, but he didn't. Instead, he was bored with the character. He didn't think it was memorable and compared the studio's attempt to make Von Trapp interesting to flogging a dead horse. Talking about the character, he admitted that playing him wasn't my cup of tea. No wonder his performance was criticized. There's a reason why Christopher said the character wasn't his cup of tea. He actually tried to change things. Before filming even began, Plummer sat down with screenwriter Ernest Lehrman, desperately trying to inject some depth into his role. In his view, Captain Von Trapp was an underdeveloped character trapped inside an overused storyline. But the trap went deeper, because then came the ultimate insult. Christopher Plummer, who had spent years training his voice, was asked not to use it. The Sound of Music was a musical. Musicals were the hottest thing back then, but Plummer didn't even get to sing. The studio dubbed his singing voice. In October 1964, Plummer's vocals were replaced by Disney veteran Bill Lee. Here was a trained actor who'd taken the role partly to showcase his singing abilities, and they replaced him. When he was asked years later if he ever broke into song, his response was blunt and fast. "Of course not," he said. Christopher really hated the film and his character. Filming must have been hellish for him. So how did he cope with making a film he hated? He drank. He didn't just drink, he drank like a man who was seeing water for the first time in years. This wasn't just a few beers between takes. Plummer was on set in Salzburg for only 11 days, but he filled every moment of downtime drinking and eating pastries until his costumes had to be let out. Charmian Carr, who played eldest daughter Liesl, was 21 years old during filming. When Oprah Winfrey asked her what she learned from the accomplished theater actor Christopher Plummer, her answer was brutally honest. She said she learned how to drink. Looks like Plummer was quite the influence on set. But should he have been drinking that much when there were children around? Carr recalled nights out at bars around Salzburg in her autobiography Forever Liesl. It was around that time she drank her first champagne. Her first time away from home, and she dove into alcohol after Plummer inspired her. It didn't stop there. In the film's famous music festival sequence, where the Von Trapp family performs before fleeing Austria, Christopher Plummer was completely drunk. He was dead drunk during one of the movie's most pivotal scenes. Even Christopher admitted his attitude toward movies came from his background as a stage actor. He thought films were inferior to theater. Plummer's drinking wasn't just about the sound of music. His habits were deeper, darker, and more dangerous than anyone imagined. As a teenager, he was often drunk on cheap alcohol, staggering home in the cold where one wrong step could have cost him everything. He didn't think he needed to change because he thought he was in good company, or bad company. Fellow actors like Jason Robards, Peter O'Toole, Richard Burton, Rex Harrison, and Albert Finney also drank heavily. But there was another reason for his drinking apart from peer influence. He was convinced he needed to drink. Being drunk helped him hide his lack of confidence and shyness. But it led to reckless behavior. In 1971, while cast in the lead role of Coriolanus at London's National Theatre, his drinking got him replaced by Anthony Hopkins. Critic Kenneth Tynan, the literary manager at the time, said Plummer was dismissed in a vote by the cast for crude and outrageous behavior. Even Plummer admitted his drinking was a big problem. Yet somehow, through all this chaos, there was one person who saw past the drunken behavior on the Sound of Music set, Julie Andrews. Here's where things get complicated. Christopher Plummer's hatred for the film spilled over into his relationship with his co-star. Plummer couldn't stand being in Andrews's presence on set. He looked down on her talents. Behind her back, he called her Miss Disney because she sometimes entertained the child actors with songs from Mary Poppins. Remember, Mary Poppins had been filmed just before The Sound of Music and had launched Andrews into superstardom. Plummer compared working with Julie Andrews to being hit over the head with a big Valentine's Day card every day. Her kindness, her gentleness, and her perpetual professionalism annoyed him to no end.